I found a love. Jim would land at the Marine Corps Air Station El Toro in Southern California, which would soon lead to his role as a Top Gun aggressor pilot at the air station at Miramar near San Diego. Throughout his entire aviation training, nothing was more challenging than aircraft carrier qualifications.
The first landing Okay, that's the ideal wire to catch. You don't want the one-arm wire because it's just before the ramp. That means you got real close to hitting the ramp as you came aboard. And then if you didn't catch a wire, it's called a bolter, okay, where you would hear them total black, and you have to go straight to instruments, and you will make the turn on instruments and come back, and then you can look down and see the boat down below you, and then you can get a little bit of a horizon that you can fly a little visually. And then, but coming back aboard that boat at night is, you know, all it is landing lights and the Christmas tree at the back, which is a big T of lights that shows the ramp at the back, and then your ball on the left-hand side. And then when you get in close enough, you can see the red deck lights, but it's just scary. Nightfalls, you only require like 2 or 3 to qualify, but I got enough to qualify at night. You don't go and do more of them just for the fun of it. You know, it's once you're qualified, that's it. You know, you quit.
Despite the high risk involved with landing a high-speed jet on a tiny aircraft carrier strip, Jim never had an accident during qualifications. He never saw any of his fellow jet pilots struggle either. By the end of his career, Jim achieved all his aviation goals, including participation in the prestigious and effective Top Gun program. He retired from the U.S. Marine Corps as an elite jet pilot with the rank of Lieutenant Colonel. Before hanging up his wings for good, he did manage to have some fun.
I know I went past Mach 1. You could get the A4 up and nose it over and just let her go, and you could break the sound barrier. I only did it one time out over the ocean because at that time, by the time we got the airplane fast enough, the A4M, fast enough to do it, you couldn't do it over the continental United States anymore. And if you did, you know, your time of flying may be over. When I was a kid, they used to do sonic booms all the time, and you know, it just got to where it, you know, everything in the cabinets would rattle and dishes would fall out and things like that, and they outlawed them. It was just kind of like an earthquake. Normally, when we flew low levels, and we did a lot of low level flying at between 100 and 500 feet, we had to be well qualified in it, because initially your training for nuclear weapons was low-level entry, and you would 100 feet was what you basically planned on entering at, and we would be doing 480 to 520, 500 knots right over the ground, about 100 feet. You know, running guys out of their boats. You know, watching the cows go sideways as you went flying over. It was fun.
A decade removed from the Vietnam War, the film Top Gun acquainted a peacetime American public with the incredible skills of elite jet pilots like Jim. The U.S. Navy reported a recruitment spike of 500% in young men wanting to be aviators after the movie's release.
The photography on that is phenomenal. That was the closest to actual what it looked like air to air, you know, dogfighting of any movie that I had seen or have seen since. I mean, it really did a good job. I mean, it was a little hokey in places, you know, but the actual flying part was well done.
Jim has not flown since retirement. Instead, he has enjoyed a successful second career as a math teacher and recently took the Latta High School girls golf team to their first state championship. For more than a decade, Jim survived the inherent dangers of combat and flight training, and his memories as a Top Gun caliber jet pilot will always be enough for him.
I enjoyed my time in the Marine Corps. I do not regret a minute of you know, of my whole career. Everything. I enjoyed the flying. I enjoyed the camaraderie. The old "once a Marine, always a Marine" is true, and you just always have a certain pride that I'm a Marine, and it's just a little different feeling, I think.
View this program again anytime at www.youtube.com/cityofadaok.
People that I met has molded my life, and the town of Ada, just such a special people, and people that really a family type atmosphere at East Central was my experience. And so a lot of my high school friends had gone there, and really it was probably not the, you know, the school that everybody thought I would go to.
When people come here, there's not as much limelight. We're not on television, but in the end, the friendships and the relationships that you make, it lasts a lifetime.
I loved that university, and it just gave so much to me and put me in the position. I would not be successful. I wouldn't have had a chance to do what I've done today if not for the people that I met in Ada, Oklahoma at East Central University.
Once a Tiger, always a Tiger, even if you're a Sun Devil. Todd Graham has enjoyed an exceptional amount of success in his career as a player and coach. He first learned the game as a kid in Texas, but his real education, in terms of football and beyond, started in Ada, Oklahoma at East Central University. One ECU coach in particular noticed his great potential.
Ron Miller came in and recruited me, and just, a guy that was just so genuine, and just a guy that I trusted.
What I'd do is I'd go set up somewhere in the Metroplex at a hotel, and then I would go places and get some film and watch it, and visit high schools and visit with the coaches. And then I'm watching the film, and then all of a sudden this one guy shows up that's just taking off. The acceleration that this guy has and taking off and moving really well is just unbelievable. So I take it back and show it to Pat O'Neill and some of the other coaches and say, hey, we got to have this guy. So it's all started there.
I was getting recruited. North Texas, UTA wound up canceling their program. SMU, Texas Tech, a lot of the different programs. And I had a son in high school, and so they kind of wanted me to go to the junior college route, the major college teens.
The fact that Todd already had a family was no deterrent to the ECU coaching staff. They saw a good kid and a gifted player worthy of an opportunity. It proved to be a mutually beneficial relationship. ECU provided Todd with the family and security he needed to truly excel.
My dad left and left my mom with 5 kids, and so coaches wound up being my dad, were that dad role model for me, and so obviously when I went to college at East Central, Coach Miller, Coach Walbrook, Coach O'Neill, they become father figures to me, and Dr. Williamson. It wasn't just my coaches; it was that you had a person like that that really looked out for you, and a person you could talk to when those coaches were making about as hard as they could make it home in 3 days.
We had the married student housing accommodations, and so with the scholarship, like a lot of other places, you could work out a deal where they could move in there. And I think it ended up being a good fit for them. The obvious other part of it was his wife can go to school, and maybe we can find a job somewhere to help her out somewhere in town.
He was married, and he had a small child, and consequently he would keep the boy on quite a number of occasions. He'd bring him to practice with him, and he'd be in the locker room, go out on the practice field with us, and a dedicated father, I would say.
I was a young man from a family that never had anybody go to college. And I remember sitting in that locker room at North Mesquite High School with Ron Miller. He had his old leather jacket on, and he was telling me what East Central could do for me. And they did every single thing that he told me.
Todd took full advantage of his opportunities at ECU, a characteristic that would follow him in all his endeavors, regardless of place or situation. As a Tiger on the field, he was nothing short of ferocious.
When Todd came as a beginning freshman, and I was coaching basketball at that time, I was assistant basketball coach, and so I was around the athletes all the time, and I didn't know who all they'd recruited, and I didn't know one of them from another, but it didn't take very long to figure out that, hey, this guy's something special because of the way he can run.
He was probably one of the fastest players I ever coached. He had the speed that he grew a little bit in strength and size, and he became one of my best tacklers.
He enjoyed hitting people, which requires desire, but he also had the ability to go get the football, and that's where desire really gets into it. If you want to make an interception, you got to work at it.
You see this major acceleration. Usually the difference that I've noticed in all this time in saying, well, this guy's a really, really good athlete, they just have that ability to edge ahead, and it's kind of like I said, the guy told me, go to a high school game and look for somebody to jump out and then show you something you hadn't seen. Todd was one of those.
While Todd was earning his stripes as a player, he was also starting to build one of the deepest and longest-lasting friendships of his life. Both played in the defensive secondary at ECU. The two Tigers developed a unique chemistry that would generate success time and time again, first as players and later as coaches.
I was a sophomore in college, and I'll never forget the very first time that we were actually doing a one-on-one drill, and I see this young guy, and he's looking across at me. I'm 6'2", 200 and probably 3 or 4 pounds at that time, and he was 5'10", 170 pounds, and could fly. He could absolutely run. So he's looking across there, and I know he's sitting there, what's going through his mind. He's like, going, this guy has no chance to cover me. So he would just kind of look at me, and he had to look down, and he would kind of point to what direction he was going to break his route off. So I would cover him, and I knew right then I was going to like this guy.
They were both very smart, good football minds. I guess Keith kind of took him under his wing a little bit because Keith was older, and as a result, they became very close.
It's been a great relationship because everywhere Todd has gone, he's tried to take Keith with him.
We were just so different, just in not only our personalities, but our backgrounds in which we came from, but we had one common denominator, and that was where and how we wanted to coach and how we wanted to go about coaching. The philosophy in which we built that was developed on those bus trips at East Central University, in those apartments, in those hotel rooms, prior to games and things, that time where you really talk about things that are important in life. I could always tell there was something different about him. I mean, not just the physical stature, but just the way that his mind operated and worked. I mean, we'd be sitting on the practice field. You're talking about 1983, Ada, Oklahoma, and we're sitting on the practice field, and he's talking about when we coach, what it's going to be like. He said, one of these days we're going to run down that ramp at the Orange Bowl. That was always his favorite saying. And I'm sitting there like thinking, what are you talking? I'm just worried about what we're going to have for dinner at the training table, and you're sitting there talking about 20 years down the road. But he was always a visionary. He was always looking forward, and that was what was always impressive about him.
In his 4 years at ECU, Todd definitely left his mark. Those Tiger teams are still among the very best the school has ever fielded, and Todd still managed to stand out.
Some of the best football players that I've been around were associated with my years at East Central. I mean, it was old school, hardcore, tough, physical football, and only the strong survived.
Oh, he was an outstanding leader, and he wasn't beyond, if somebody wasn't doing their job, to jump on them and try to get them back in line and get in the right direction. I think from all the way around, in every view that you could have of his situation on the football field, he was an outstanding leader.
My greatest days, when I look back on my football career, was being an All-American defensive back at East Central University. I think I started every game there.
Just as his abilities had jumped off the screen as a high school player, they would again as an ECU Tiger. NFL scouts marveled at his talent, and the St. Louis Cardinals signed him to a free agent contract. An injury derailed his hopes of a professional career, but perhaps fatefully it allowed him to return to his original plan of becoming a coach. It also allowed him to carry on the special friendships he had made as a Tiger. Once again, success followed.
Wound up getting cut, and then decided I wanted to go back to my community in Mesquite, Texas, and give back to those kids what my coaches had given me. Did that for 3.5 years, and it really helped my career, and then got an opportunity to go back to East Central as the defensive coordinator, and that really defined my coaching philosophy, because we'd gone, when I went back there, the program was down. We had won when I was playing there, and then it had some bad years. I think they'd won one game the year before, and came in 3 years, won a national championship.
A lot of these coaches are in it to get W's, but he was in it. He was coaching because he wanted to do better for the kids. In other words, wanted to find kids that he could help and that would get better. And I saw that in him, and he had a passion for it. So I was glad to get him back, and I wasn't disappointed. He was that type of guy, and the enthusiasm that he had, he still has.
First of all, Todd's the one that recruited the bulk of those kids that played on that national championship team. His contacts, and not just on the defensive side of the ball, but he was very much involved in recruiting several of the offensive players. But to win a national championship, somewhere in every newspaper in the country that has a sports page, it listed somewhere in there that East Central University was the NAIA national champion. And so, yeah, that was incredibly significant. Kind of a humorous thing maybe about Todd is in the national championship game, at halftime, going off the field, Ron Miller was the offensive coordinator. Todd told Ron, said, "You've got to keep scoring because we can't stop them." And he got enough stops, and Ron got enough points on the board where they were the national champions by a couple of touchdowns.
That's one of the things that profoundly affected my coaching career, and that I really knew that you can accomplish anything, if you set your mind to it. And that's something I'll always be proud of, the national championship that's been won there. The pride that I have in that is big time. And I think probably the best era, and everybody thinks their era is the best, but you look at from 83 through 86 was a pretty incredible year. I think we shared or won the conference championship every year, and we're ranked, I think, in first or second in the nation, in 1984, and I really wanted to win a national championship back then. But we were close, but then to go ahead and get to finish it as a coach and get to win it, all those players that played with me, I felt like were there with me on the sideline, and many of them stood on the sideline for that game. So that national championship was big for me. So that's kind of, how my career progressed.
Todd would parlay his role in ECU's national championship into his first head coaching job. Now that he was calling the shots, he sought out his former Tiger roommate, who had been busy building a coaching career of his own. It would signal the beginning of a long and successful coaching run, still in full stride.
And he ends up becoming the head football coach at Midwest City, Carl Albert. And then the next year, he gets the job at Allen High School, and that's when things changed. He gave me a phone call and said, "Hey, I'm going to go to Allen High School." He said, "Would you be interested in coming?" And that's where we got started. I chose to leave Edmond Santa Fe High School, went with him down to Dallas, and we started coaching high school football together and began to build the foundation for what our program stands for, even to this day.
He's one of those guys, he remember how it was, where he grew up, where he's from, and the people along the way that have helped him. I'm sure there have been a lot of connections along the way, and he respects that, and he respects those people that have had an influence in his life, just like any of us. There's always been somebody that's had an influence in your life, and he knows that deep down inside.
I think if I had to define coach in one word, I think loyalty would definitely be at the top of that list, just because this is something that we had talked about over 30 years ago. We were living in a one-bedroom apartment in 1995 in Allen, Texas, and he would come home and he would tell me what the new school was going to look like. He would tell me what the new football stadium and the football complex was going to look like, and talk about winning championships. In his words, do it the right way. We're gonna coach men with character, discipline, smart, toughness. All those four cornerstones of our program to this day were laid in that one-bedroom apartment. That's the foundation for which we built our program around, and we've stayed the course over all these years.
Something else that ECU's championship brought Todd was national respect. Although it would take time, the head coach of the team the Tigers beat that day for the NAIA title would reach out to Todd and offer him his first NCAA Division I coaching opportunity.
Rich Rodriguez was the opposing coach for the national championship game. He was the coach at Glenville. And that spring at a coaching conference, they went up and spoke to each other, just because they had been around each other for 2 or 3 days and going through the banquets and stuff that were involved with the national championship game. And Rich Rodriguez made the comment that the best prepared for the offense, the no-huddle offense that Rich Rodriguez was the first one to really run, was Todd Graham. And that he couldn't do everything he wanted to do against Todd's defense because of the preparation. And that really created the rapport. When Rich Rodriguez took the West Virginia job, well, he brought Todd to West Virginia as a defensive coach, and then Todd eventually became the defensive coordinator there. Well, that's really an interesting situation in that they worked together, and now they're vying for, who's going to be the top dog in the state of Arizona, plus in the Pac-12 South. So they know each other very well.
Todd wasted no time making a name for himself at West Virginia. with Rodriguez promoting him to defensive co-coordinator in only his second year. The following season, he became the sole defensive coordinator for the Tulsa Golden Hurricane. With that promotion came the opportunity to put together his own staff. Not surprisingly, one of the first calls he made was to Keith.
I was still at Allen High School, and he called me, and we went back to the University of Tulsa. Coach was the defensive coordinator. They hired me as the linebacker coach. And that's where things really began to unfold, because we took over a program that basically said, hey, I think you got about 3 years to turn the program around, or we're just going to, possibilities of canceling the football program and just going to playing basketball. And so we went in there and we just rolled up our sleeves and went to work and was able to turn around the University of Tulsa. We'd won somewhere around 68 games and won the Conference USA Championship. So that was really where it got started. We thought that was the greatest job on earth at that particular time, and we didn't worry about what was wrong with the program. We just went to work and had great success.
As he had done at West Virginia earlier, Todd had helped engineer an amazing turnaround at Tulsa. His national reputation continued to grow, and a few years later he landed his first Division I coaching job at Rice. After one successful season there, he returned to Tulsa as that program's top coach, continuing to win and garner national attention. In 2012, he was named head coach of the Arizona State Sun Devils and has enjoyed great success there, including being honored as the Pac-12 Coach of the Year in 2013. Those familiar with Todd's work ethic expected nothing less.
Knowing his background, he knew how to work hard. Just the level of intensity there was with him, just all the way around in everything he did and everything he approached. So it's no surprise to me that he is the head football coach at Arizona State.
You got to give us permission to make you the best that you can be, right? I can't make you do anything you don't want to do, but it is my job to strain you. It is my job to force that out of you. Does that make sense? Let's go. Here we go. One line. Let's go. Right here.
Well, he radiates positiveness, and there's no doubt that he says what he's going to do, and he does it.
Todd's very bright. I mean, a high level of intellect. When you have the tools to work with that he has and you're willing to put forth the effort, there's a pretty good chance you're going to be successful. Todd's a tremendous teacher. He's a great classroom teacher. In fact, he has an adage that he always tells his assistants, don't tell them, teach them. If you tell them, there's a chance they're going to forget. If you teach them, they know what to do.
Hey, Lloyd, makes it, Lloyd. 1001. Makes sense? I got to get my elbows locked out, right? You got to long arm him. Long arm him.
He lays out the vision, and he has an uncanny ability to push people. I'm talking about coaches, I'm talking about players, to be better than what they even believe they can be. You have to love the game of football to be willing to get on a bus and ride a bus 15 hours to go play a football game, play the game, get back on the bus, okay, get handed a box lunch or a box of chicken, and drive 15 hours back, and then go to class on Monday. You got to love the game. And so I think that instilled the heart in each one of us that, man, we loved the game. We loved our teammates, and we played for each other. And I think that is the one thing that was instilled in not only me, but Todd at East Central University.
Todd returned to ECU in the spring of 2015 to deliver the commencement address to the newest class of graduating Tigers. He was also named a Distinguished Alumnus, an honor that for him is every bit as special as anything he has accomplished on the football field.
Our teammates, we had the Caleb brothers. Obviously Coach Patterson here that was with me, he and I were free safety and strong safety. We had one of the top defenses in the country when we played there, and a lot of guys that had transferred from OU, and back then, it was the NAIA. We played a really, really good brand of football. Some of the battles and the wars against Texas A&I Kingsville, I remember those trips very, very well. I remember going down, and one play that really stuck out to me my senior year is Johnny Bailey, who went on to play with the Chicago Bears. Had run the option, and the fullback had been really hurting us, and we had the ball on their 1 yard line. I'm supposed to take Johnny Bailey, the pitch back, and I decided I was going to take the fullback, and so I can still see that quarterback pulling and pitching that ball. And I chased Johnny Bailey for 98 yards and stripped the ball out on the 1-yard line and recovered it. And so I think he had 240-something yards rushing that game, and we knocked 99 off there. So, and that was the one play that Stan White, the scout for the Cardinals, one of the reasons why they signed me, the free agent deal. But you know, I more than anything, it wasn't just one play that stuck out to me. I do remember standing on Norris Field and looking down at the clock, counting down. Northeastern was the last game that I played there. Had 3 interceptions in that game. I tied for the school record, 20 interceptions, something like that.
The thing that Todd can do, whether it's a player, whether it be somebody on his coaching staff, if something goes wrong, he's going to bring it to your attention. And he may rip you 1 minute, but as soon as that's over, it's over. Todd does not hold grudges. Todd's a second chance guy. Now don't mess up that second time in the same way.
Right? Here we go.
He showed you what was wrong. You need to learn. But a great second chance guy and incredible loyalty.
Obviously, I've worked my whole life to get where I'm at and just love it here. But, you know, I wouldn't change a thing. If I had to do all over again, man, I'm just so grateful I got an opportunity to live and spend time. I spent 8 years of my life in Ada, Oklahoma, 4 of them going to school and another 4, you know, coaching a football team there. And it just molded me in so many ways. And, you know, you move on so fast, you don't get a chance to thank people. And I'm proud. And I was born in Texas. I spent over half my life in Oklahoma. And I'll always be an East Central Tiger. And I'm very grateful to the people there that afforded me the opportunity.
Those who know Todd best know he is far from finished. Still a young man by coaching standards, the Tigers' best is yet to come. But no matter how much he achieves, Todd will never forget where he first learned to succeed.
For an old boy from East Central University, man, I sit there and I'm like, man, and I feel like all my teammates and our fans and the people there that made a difference in my life are with me. I've gotten a chance to, you know, beat Notre Dame twice and to really experience some great things as a coach. And I'm just grateful. If not for the people there, I wouldn't be here.
He doesn't know how to fail. And his work ethic is incredible. Todd's just not going to let you outwork him. That's not going to happen.
He's never, ever not felt compassion and love for the players that played for him and that he recruited. He always had close ties with them, and I think he always tried to maintain those. So, yeah, I'm proud of him.
My experience with Ada, Oklahoma, it just taught me how to be a winner and to be a champion. And, you know,
he always had close ties with him, and I think he always
I learned that in Ada, Oklahoma. You shake somebody's hand, you look them in the eye. And my experience with Ada, Oklahoma, it just taught me how to be a champion.
He always had close ties with him, and I think he always
I learned that in Ada, Oklahoma. You shake somebody's hand, you look them in the eye. And my experience with Ada, Oklahoma, it just taught me how to be a champion.
He always had close ties with him, and I think he always
I learned that in Ada, Oklahoma. You shake somebody's hand, you look them in the eye. And my experience with Ada, Oklahoma, it just taught me how to be a champion. I learned that in Ada, Oklahoma. You shake somebody's hand, you look them in the eye. And my experience with Ada, Oklahoma, it just taught me how to be a champion. I learned that in Ada, Oklahoma. You shake somebody's hand, you look them in the eye. And my experience with Ada, Oklahoma, it just taught me how to be a champion. I learned that in Ada, Oklahoma. You shake somebody's hand, you look them in the eye. And my experience with Ada, Oklahoma, it just taught me how to be a champion. I learned that in Ada, Oklahoma. You shake somebody's hand, you look them in the eye. And my experience with Ada, Oklahoma, it just taught me how to be a champion. I learned that in Ada, Oklahoma. You shake somebody's hand, you look them in the eye. And my experience with Ada, Oklahoma, it just taught me how to be a champion. I learned that in Ada, Oklahoma. You shake somebody's hand, you look them in the eye. And my experience with Ada, Oklahoma, it just taught me how to be a champion. I learned that in Ada, Oklahoma. You shake somebody's hand, you look them in the eye. And my experience with Ada, Oklahoma, it just taught me how to be a champion. I learned that in Ada, Oklahoma. You shake somebody's hand, you look them in the eye. And my experience with Ada, Oklahoma, it just taught me
practices that went in even 1940s Europe as well as the Western world. Why the doctors did it, part of the reason would probably be, I'm following orders, but another one is you have to understand people who were generally attracted to the Nazi Party and would commit these heinous, barbaric acts. Many of them were true blue believers. They believed in the inferiority of not just Jews, but gypsies, the handicapped, the mentally deficient, non-Anglo-Saxons, the Russians, you name it. Some of these doctors almost enjoyed the unnecessary inflicting of pain and malice and physical and mental deformation on their subjects, if not complete death.
Born in 1889 in northwest Arkansas, Johnson Tal Crawford enjoyed a long and distinguished career on the bench. Crawford was first elected as a Pontotoc County judge in 1921, just a few years after serving in World War I. He served as county judge until 1936, when he was appointed as a district judge for Pontotoc County. 10 years later, after the conclusion of World War II, his judicial career experienced a quantum leap when President Truman appointed him to the Civil Affairs Division of the War Crimes Branch of the Nuremberg trials. The doctor's trial, over which he presided, would contain some of the most far-reaching and impactful judgments of all the war crime tribunals.
Well, first of all, they had to document the evil of the Nazi regime, what occurred in the name of the Nazi government. But in hindsight, what they also proved to be very important is it laid the marker of what's acceptable by a government, by its people, and more importantly, if you happen to engage in illegal activity, you'll be taken to the cleaner, so to speak. You'll be held accountable. And that's one of the landmark reasons why the Nurembergs were so important, is it laid a marker of what's acceptable behavior at the state level and in the name of the people.
20 of the 23 defendants during the tribunal Crawford presided over were medical doctors and were accused of having been involved in Nazi human experimentation and mass murder under the guise of euthanasia. Of the 23 defendants, 7 were acquitted and 7 received death sentences. The remainder received prison sentences ranging from 10 years to life in prison. Aside from judgments against these war criminals, the doctor's trial produced the immensely influential Nuremberg Code, a set of research principles for human experimentation still followed today. Although the legal force of the code was never established, it serves as the basis for the Code of Federal Regulations governing federally funded human subject research in the United States. Judge Crawford helped set in stone these moral and ethical guidelines.
In terms of experimentation, anything of that nature, there are rules and regulations and procedures you have to follow. And those were set down by the Nuremberg. And they will include everything from a willing acceptance by the subject, they know what they're getting into, to not doing anything that would give them undue hardship, pain, or result in death. One of the ripple effects of the Nuremberg Code and the Nuremberg trials is if you are given an order that is unethical, that you know is wrong, you have an obligation to say no. The doctors, the military officers, political leaders would simply say, Adolf Hitler did it. And it's always convenient to finger somebody who's dead. Well, the Nuremberg trials and subsequent the doctor trials afterward laid down the marker, laid down the policy that from henceforth, if you are asked to do something that you know is illegal, it is unjustifiable, you have a moral obligation, and under international law, a political as well as legal one, to say no. And the idea that you were just following orders no longer holds mustard.
The atrocities committed by the Nazi regime against humanity had to be calculated, addressed, and adjudicated, no matter how horrific. Judge Crawford played an incredibly significant role in this process, helping to drag into the light the gruesome deeds of the Nazi Party and administer justice as far as that was attainable.
Unlike other wars in the 20th century, which kind of have a lot of gray area, which have a lot of, well, who started it? We really don't know. Without the Nazi regime, without Hitler, you don't have World War II. So it is at the crux of the war itself. World War II displayed to the world at large the barbarity and evil of the Nazi regime. It was a war that, by all accounts, is seen as a good war from the Allies' perspective. And the reason why it's seen that way is because of the momentum, the enormity of the evil by the Nazi regime itself. It is a marker in history in which there's a before and after. The world is not the same because of World War II. Every country, every dictator, every movement will be judged by the totality of the evil of the Nazi movement and the Nazi perpetrators and the Nazi organizations.
In the time during and immediately after the war, when the world was shattered, the moral authority of the United States played a significant role in healing and putting the pieces of people's lives back together. While other nations also pursued justice through the subsequent trials, the U.S. provided leadership when the rest of the world so desperately needed it. Judge Crawford remains a key player during that fragile period.
The United States has always prided itself, when it has fought a war, to limit as much collateral damage as possible. That doesn't mean that innocent people aren't going to die. That doesn't mean that territory and property won't be destroyed unnecessarily. Really what it gets down to is intent. To morally equate the United States to the Nazi regime, or morally equate the United States to the Soviet Empire and say they're the same because we fought a war in which some people may have died, is just ludicrous. All's fair in love and war, but the United States goes out of its way, holds it to a standard that no other country is held to, both by itself and the world at large, that it doesn't kill innocent people, even if that sometimes shortens the war.
After his groundbreaking work in Nuremberg, Judge Crawford returned to Ada and quietly resumed his judicial duties. He passed away without much fanfare in 1955, leaving behind an incredible legacy. Prior to his death, Crawford gave his private papers to his friend Thomas Kemp, who ultimately passed them on to East Central University, where they still remain.
You can get a snapshot into the eyes of a man who went halfway across the globe to engage in an event that is world known. He obviously had far more connections beyond small Pontotoc County in Ada, Oklahoma. For ECU, it is very, very, very important that we have these papers, not for just preservations, but to show people that we do have individuals who did very important things, whose actions will resonate far beyond their mere mortal time on Earth.
Anyone in the West probably knew Ada, just like they knew Phoenix and, you know, some of the other places that had rodeos. Ada was known for that.
Ultimately, we'd like to see it like it was in the 40s when they had the big parade and the Western Heritage Week and everything to go along with it.
I went to the rodeo this last year. It's a good rodeo. They had good stock, good cowboys, and that's what makes it good.
Author John Grisham once described Ada, Oklahoma as a place where the West meets the South. For more than 80 years and counting, rodeo competitors from around the country have gathered at the crossroads of Ada to battle for prize money and bragging rights. Ada's rich rodeo tradition began in earnest in 1935 with the local fire department.
At the fire station, they were talking one day and saying that they really needed something for August, have something going on in August because it was so hot and miserable and nothing happened. So they said, well, why don't we have a rodeo? So they got busy, and somebody said they knew where they could get some Brahmas. And someone else said, well, they could bring in their steers and they'd offer their cattle. And they just got together and did all these plans. And 3 weeks later, they had a rodeo. They didn't make any money off the rodeo, but they didn't lose any either. So they thought that was a pretty good sign.
Just like that, the Ada Firemen's Rodeo was born. The timing couldn't have been better. In the midst of the Great Depression, residents were starved for cheap local entertainment. During this era, agriculture still occupied a preeminent position in rural economies like Ada's. Working cowboys were much more common then, and the spirit of the Old West, although fading, could more easily be found.
Ada, like any of the other little towns all over the West, would have little groups that would get together and rode. And in Ada, they would get together where East Central University now stands.
I lived in Norfolk, Nebraska, and I had a uncle that was on Shetland ponies. And he had sales up there in Nebraska, and David Schellenberger lived out here, come up there and clip ponies, and I told him that I wanted to be a bull rider. And I'd got on a few bulls and loved it. I was pretty young, and David Schellenberger said, if you want to learn to rodeo and ride bulls, he said, you come to Oklahoma.
To call the first years of the Ada Firemen's Rodeo sensational would be underselling it. A surprise crowd of thousands showed up for the first one in 1935, prompting a quick move from the old ballpark to the county fairgrounds. The next couple of years saw crowds double, then triple. More grandstands, chutes, and lights had to be added. By the end of the decade, crowds were starting to number in the tens of thousands. Stands were overflowing and people were being turned away.
It grew into the second largest outdoor rodeo in the nation for years and years. They actually were the top outdoor rodeo in the nation for a 5-day rodeo one year.
They always scheduled it for the second week in August, right after Cheyenne. And you know, Cheyenne was the big rodeo. They'd go to the Cheyenne rodeo and then just head to the Ada rodeo because they were getting closer to their home states. And because they put all the money back into it, prize money. And that way some of the big names would come on here. So that's what really kept them going. And of course they put everything back in. And Cheyenne would have already happened. So they knew what the Cheyenne purses were. And they would get donations and up theirs. There was one year it even surpassed the Cheyenne rodeo in purse and attendance.
The Ada Firemen's Rodeo continued to break attendance records in the early 1940s. A parade down Main Street became part of the festivities, and its pageantry would often draw as many spectators as the rodeo itself. For that one August weekend, Ada would explode off the map. Newspaper accounts of the day reported rodeo fans coming from every corner of the U.S. Oklahoma Governor Leon Phillips attended more than once while in office.
It was a community thing. People loved rodeo, and they loved parades. You know, there wasn't a TV pulling them away. I can remember as a child, we weren't rodeo people, but we were sure never missed any of the parades. You thought about it all summer long. I remember having a little cowgirl costume that I would wear when we went. It became a social thing. The society page would be full of people coming to visit other families, and they would schedule their family reunions for rodeo week. And of course people would go to the wagon yard, camp out, but it was a big thing. They took care of August quite well.
The Second World War put a damper on a lot of leisure activity across the country, including the Ada Firemen's Rodeo. Certainly there were more important matters at hand, but the rodeo soldiered on despite a dramatic drop in attendance and the fire department's inability to carry on with it because of civil defense duties. But local businesses and civic clubs stepped forward to keep it alive. After the war, the rodeo once again drew large crowds and the best cowboys to be found anywhere.
I'd met a bunch of boys that lived down here that rodeoed, and the first time that I made the rodeo, Chuck Smith and Hoot Gibson promoted it, and it was Ada Rodeo, and that was at the fairgrounds. Rodeoed 38 years, but I just rode bulls for 15 years, and then I got big and just started steer wrestling. Really in rodeo, youth is the best there is. When you're young, you got better reflexes. Your subconscious mind's got to tell your conscious mind to do something, and then you got to do it. You got to think it, sleep it, eat it. You got to want to do it in the worst way. That's what makes you become good.
In 1962, rodeo performer and promoter Ken Lance bought the rights to Ada's Rodeo, soon marking the end of a quarter-century run at the Pontotoc County Fairgrounds. But it was far from the end for the local rodeo. With ties to professional rodeo associations and famous entertainers, it would thrive for many decades to come, although on a smaller scale than that reached by the pre-war firemen's rodeos.
Ken Lance took the rodeo over and moved it south of Ada, and he turned it into a huge success out there. They had concerts, and there was a huge rodeo out there also.
And I went to every one that he had there, and of course it was called just the Ada Rodeo.
Ken Lance's rodeos were always well attended, but primarily because of big-name musicians he was able to book for concerts surrounding the annual event. Rodeo itself was becoming more of a niche sport thanks in part to the evolution of post-war technology and increases in personal incomes. Die-hard fans wouldn't miss a rodeo, but for many others it became just another of many entertainment options.
By the end of World War II, the servicemen coming back, getting into motorcycles and other things, and never got the point where people weren't interested in the rodeo. But it was getting, less, I guess dominant would be the word.
Under the guidance of the Ada Elks Lodge, Ken Lance, and scores of other community groups and leaders, the Ada Firemen's Rodeo has continued uninterrupted since 1935, save for a few years off here and there. In 2013, 78 years after its birth, the rodeo returned to the hands of its creators, the Ada Fire Department, who brought it back home.
When Ken Lance passed away and the rodeo kind of started to die back down, at that point's when we picked it back up and moved it back to Ada. I talked to our membership. We decided that we would go ahead and take that challenge. We had a short window, about 2 months, to get ready for it, but we went ahead and took it back under the fire department and had it out at Ken Lance that year as an open rodeo. 2 years ago, we had the open rodeo again, but we moved it back to the Agriplex, the original place that it started. We went ahead and moved it, thought it'd be better for the rodeo, for Ada. It brings people to the community.
Since moving back into town, the now renamed Ada Firefighters Rodeo has increased in attendance each year. Because of the turnout and strong reorganization, the International Pro Rodeo Association has taken notice, adding the event to its tour schedule.
Last year, after the rodeo, the IPRA came to us and asked if we'd be interested in doing their Southern Region tour finale. With it moving to the IPRA Southern Region, we moved our rodeo to October because all the summertime rodeos count towards the finals. It's the final stop for those cowboys and cowgirls. We only take the top 10 out of Oklahoma, Texas, Arkansas, and Kansas to compete.
When you take 10 or 15 cowboys out of your region, or when you take them boys that's in them rodeos and they have to win so much to get there, they're the best crop there is.
As many guys as we can get involved as far as putting up banners, signs, those types of things. And in the days of the rodeo, it's pretty much every member needs to be here. And the guys that are on duty can come and kind of help as much as possible, but still be ready to respond if needed. So our chief allows them to come up and more or less just kind of hang out. If we need something, we use them. If not, they're right there by their truck ready to go.
The proud history of rodeo in Ada has come full circle. With the competitive structure of a national association behind it, the Ada Firefighters Rodeo is primed to write many more exciting chapters in that book. Although times have changed, The spirit of the Old West still lives where the West meets the South, where there's always a place for rodeo.
Back years ago, what we done, we improved it and made it better, and then the people come along, they try to make things better. Well, they sure have.
Everybody's got so many activities they're going to with their kids or this and that. It's tough to draw, and that's why we went to the IPRA finals. We're hoping that that's a bigger draw, a better competition for them to watch, better animals. That word will get out, and hopefully people will be interested and want to come watch. The Agriplex will hold about 3,000 a night, and we'd like to fill it up.
View this program again anytime at www.youtube.com/cityofadaok.